How We Think and Learn by AZLAN, M.A. Dedication to three leading lights of the blind and visually impaired, BVI, community in Malaysia, Moses Choo Cheong, Loh Kong Ken, and Dr. Lim Tien Hong, Ph.D., my mentors whose relentless, generous guidance, unwavering dedication, and steadfast support have helped me navigate life as a VIP, visually impaired person.
Sunday, 10th of May, 2026. This short audiobook is my attempt to set out an exposition of how I think and learn, and more specifically, how I come to know. It is a structured reflection on my internal mental models as they have developed through engagement with psychology, philosophy, and epistemology. It draws particularly on developmental psychology, cognitive psychology, learning theory, and epistemology, the study of knowledge and the ways in which we know what we know. The intention is not to present a comprehensive or authoritative account of these disciplines. Rather, it is an articulation of my current understanding as it stands at this point in time, shaped by both study and lived cognitive experience. As such, it should be read as a provisional framework rather than a final statement, a mental map of a working model of mind offered in the hope that it may serve as a useful, clarifying, or at least thought-provoking map, compass, navigational tool, or ladder for the reader. Whilst entirely descriptive and not prescriptive, some readers may find this audiobook more instructive than others, depending on their stage of cognitive development. George Kelly's Personal Construct Theory by AZLAN, M.A., Sunday, 10th of May, 2026. In the 1930s, during the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression, clinical psychologist George Kelly worked as a traveling counselor across the American Midwest. He went from farm to farm offering psychological help to struggling farmers. What caught his attention was a consistent pattern: two farmers living next to each other, facing almost identical conditions. The same severe drought, the same crushing debt, the same dying crops would respond in completely opposite ways. One farmer would become demoralized and eventually give up. The other would stay calm, keep experimenting with new approaches, and often find a way to survive. This observation planted the seeds for what later became Kelly's most important contribution. In 1955, he published his major work, The Psychology of Personal Constructs, a 2-volume book that introduced a new way of understanding human behavior. Kelly's central insight was this: human beings do not merely react to the world, they actively interpret it. Each person develops a unique set of personal constructs, which function like internal mental templates. These constructs are bipolar in nature. We understand things by placing them between two opposite poles. For example, friendly versus hostile, safe versus dangerous, predictable versus unpredictable, or competent versus incompetent. These personal constructs are not the same as two more familiar concepts, mindset and worldview, even though the three are closely connected. A mindset refers to your beliefs about yourself and your abilities. It includes your core values and belief systems about whether traits like intelligence or character are fixed or can be developed. A worldview, by contrast, is much broader. It contains your fundamental assumptions about life, human nature, morality, and how the world fundamentally operates. Personal constructs sit beneath both. They are the basic building blocks. Your mindset and worldview are formed from the specific set of constructs you have developed over time. A person with many rigid constructs will tend to have a fixed mindset and a pessimistic worldview. Someone whose constructs are more flexible will usually show a growth-oriented mindset and a more adaptable worldview. It is unfortunate that personal construct theory is rarely taught outside specialized psychology courses because its implications reach far beyond clinical practice. In fact, personal construct theory also has relevance to learning theory, pedagogy, and philosophy. This idea that each of us actively constructs our own version of reality leads directly to the next key concept, the biological idea that every organism, including every human being, actually lives in its own unique subjective universe, a concept known as the Umwelt. Jacob von Uexkill's Umwelt by AZLAN ADNAN MA, Sunday, 10th of May 2026. The concept of Umwelt was introduced in 1909 by the Baltic German biologist Jakob von Uexküll. Born in 1864 in Estonia, he studied zoology at the University of Tartu, then known as the University of Dorpat in Tartu. He later conducted extensive research at the Stazione Zoologica Anton Dorn in Naples, Italy. Uexküll's central insight was revolutionary. Different organisms do not live in the same objective world. Instead, each species lives in its own unique subjective universe, its Umwelt. According to Uexküll, an animal's Umwelt is determined solely by its sensory organs and nervous system. Only the stimuli that its body is biologically equipped to detect exist for that creature. Everything else is invisible to it. A classic example is a tick, a blood-sucking arachnid. For this tiny creature, the entire world consists of just 3 sensations: the smell of butyric acid found in animal sweat, the heat of a warm-blooded body, and the touch of hair. Once it detects these, it drops onto its host, feeds, and then falls off. Its entire life cycle driven by these 3 signals alone. A bee lives in a world dominated by ultraviolet light and the polarization of sunlight. A dog experiences a world in which smell is hundreds of times richer and more detailed than anything a human can perceive. When we apply this concept to human beings, the implications are profound. Each person does not merely have different opinions. They literally live in a different subjective universe. Your Umwelt is shaped by your personal constructs, your experiences, your values, your fears, and your expectations. 2 people can witness the exact same event and yet experience 2 completely different realities. This naturally brings us to cognitive dissonance, the intense psychological discomfort that occurs when new information threatens to shatter or contradict the constructs that form our personal Umwelt. Cognitive Filters and Cognitive Dissonance by AZLAN ADNAN MA, Sunday, 10th of May, 2026. Human beings do not experience reality directly. What we call reality is actually a filtered interpretation of reality. At every moment, the human brain is bombarded by an overwhelming flood of sensory information: sounds, colors, movement, language, facial expressions, memories, emotions, bodily sensations, social cues, and environmental signals. The nervous system cannot consciously process all of it simultaneously. If it tried, the mind would collapse under informational overload. To solve this problem, the brain uses cognitive filters. Cognitive filters are the mental mechanisms that determine which information is allowed into conscious awareness and which information is ignored, suppressed, distorted, or reinterpreted. They act as gatekeepers of perception. These filters are shaped by personal experience, emotional conditioning, cultural upbringing, education, trauma, ideology, memory, personality, and biological predisposition. In many ways, cognitive filters function as the operational machinery of the Umwelt. Jakob von Uexküll argued that every organism lives inside its own subjective universe, determined by the sensory systems available to it. Human beings operate similarly, but with an additional layer of psychological interpretation. We do not merely filter sensory information biologically, we also filter reality cognitively. This means 2 people can stand in the exact same room, hear the same words, witness the same event, and yet walk away with entirely different interpretations of what occurred. The event itself may be identical. The experienced reality is not. One person may interpret criticism as useful feedback. Another interprets the same criticism as humiliation or personal attack. One person sees uncertainty as danger. Another sees uncertainty as possibility. One individual notices opportunity everywhere. Another notices only threat and limitation. Their cognitive filters determine which aspects of reality become psychologically real to them. This idea connects directly to George Kelly's personal construct theory. Kelly argued that human beings interpret the world through internal systems of personal constructs, mental categories that organize experience into oppositional pairs, such as safe versus dangerous, trustworthy versus deceptive, competent versus incompetent, or success versus failure. Cognitive filters are built from these constructs. Once a construct becomes deeply embedded, the mind begins selectively filtering reality in ways that reinforce it. This process is often unconscious. The brain continuously searches for evidence that confirms existing constructs, while minimizing or rejecting evidence that contradicts them. Psychologists refer to this tendency as confirmation bias. But confirmation bias itself is only one expression of a larger filtering system. Over time, these filters become self-reinforcing. A person who unconsciously believes people cannot be trusted will disproportionately notice betrayal, deception, and dishonesty while overlooking acts of loyalty or kindness. A person whose construct is "I am inadequate" will often reinterpret success as luck while treating criticism as proof of personal failure. The filter shapes perception. Perception shapes interpretation. Interpretation reinforces the original filter. Eventually, the construct becomes experienced as reality itself. This is where cognitive dissonance emerges. The concept of cognitive dissonance was introduced in 1957 by social psychologist Leon Festinger. Festinger proposed that human beings experience intense psychological discomfort when they encounter information that directly contradicts their existing beliefs, constructs, or behaviors. Cognitive dissonance is not merely intellectual disagreement. It is psychological tension. The discomfort can become so powerful that people will often distort reality itself in order to reduce it. When new information threatens a deeply embedded construct, the mind experiences instability because the construct is part of the person's internal psychological architecture. If the construct collapses, the surrounding worldview may begin collapsing with it. As a result, people unconsciously deploy defensive cognitive filters to protect their existing worldview. They may deny evidence, dismiss sources, rationalize contradictions, reinterpret facts, attack the messenger, or selectively remember only information that preserves internal consistency. The greater the emotional investment in a construct, the stronger the defensive reaction tends to become. This is why deeply held political, religious, and ideological beliefs are often resistant to evidence. The issue is not usually intelligence. The issue is structural psychological stability. To threaten a person's core constructs is, in many cases, to threaten their entire psychological umwelt. The mind therefore treats contradictory information almost like an immune system threat. Ironically, highly intelligent people are not necessarily less vulnerable to this process. In some cases, they become even more skilled at rationalizing contradictions because they possess greater verbal and analytical ability to defend existing constructs. Cognitive dissonance explains why individuals can maintain contradictory beliefs for years while remaining unaware of the contradiction itself. It also explains why genuine philosophical thinking is psychologically difficult. True philosophy requires the willingness to examine one's own cognitive filters instead of merely defending them. It requires the ability to tolerate uncertainty long enough for deeper understanding to emerge. Most people seek psychological comfort. Philosophical inquiry often destroys comfort. To examine your own filters honestly is to recognize that much of what you experience as objective reality may actually be interpretation layered upon interpretation. This does not mean reality itself is unreal. It means human access to reality is always mediated. Every human being lives inside a psychologically filtered umwelt, constructed from biology, memory, emotion, language, and personal constructs. And for most people, the most difficult thing in the world is not learning something new. It is seeing beyond the filters they mistake for reality itself. Cognitive filters do not operate in isolation. They are not passive lenses through which reality is simply seen, but dynamic selection systems that continuously maintain the integrity of a person's internal construct architecture. When new information enters the system, it is not evaluated neutrally. It is evaluated in relation to existing constructs, and more importantly, in relation to the stability of the entire umwelt those constructs sustain. This is where cognitive dissonance becomes structurally significant rather than merely psychologically uncomfortable. Cognitive dissonance is not just a feeling of contradiction. It is a signal that the existing construct system is under pressure. It indicates that the cognitive filters are being forced to process information that does not cleanly map onto the current interpretive framework. At this point, something important happens. The system does not immediately decide what to believe. It enters a transitional state. This transitional state is not random. It is governed by implicit rules of acceptance and rejection that determine whether a new construct can be integrated, modified, or excluded. In other words, once cognitive dissonance is triggered, the mind does not simply choose between belief and disbelief. It begins a structured evaluation process. This is precisely where George Kelly's framework becomes essential. Kelly's insight was not only that humans interpret reality through constructs, but that the adoption of new constructs follows a predictable internal logic. Cognitive dissonance is the threshold condition that determines whether this logic is even activated. If dissonance is too extreme, the cognitive filters reject the incoming information outright. The construct system protects itself by exclusion. The Umwelt remains intact and no structural change occurs. However, if the dissonance is tolerable but unresolved, the system does not collapse. Instead, it destabilizes in a controlled way. Competing interpretations begin to alternate within awareness. The mind oscillates between incompatible constructs, attempting to determine which model better preserves coherence. This oscillatory phase is not a failure of reasoning. It is the operational space in which construct revision becomes possible. Seen from this perspective, cognitive dissonance is not an endpoint. It is a gateway condition. It marks the moment when cognitive filters can no longer maintain a single stable representation of reality, forcing the system into a temporary state of interpretive duality. In this state, the mind is effectively testing the boundaries of its own Umwelt. It is precisely here that Kelly's 3 conditions for construct acceptance become active as the stabilizing mechanism that resolves the dissonance. The system does not resolve contradiction randomly. It resolves it by evaluating whether a new construct can be structurally integrated without destabilizing the broader interpretive framework. Permeability determines whether the new construct can even enter the system without triggering immediate rejection. Range of convenience determines whether it can function across multiple contexts rather than remaining narrowly localized. Predictive efficiency determines whether it produces superior explanatory and anticipatory value compared to the existing construct. Cognitive dissonance, therefore, is not separate from construct theory. It is the experiential surface of construct evaluation in progress. What appears subjectively as confusion is, at a deeper structural level, the mind running comparative tests between competing interpretive frameworks under conditions of instability. Once this is understood, a critical conceptual transition becomes visible. Cognitive filters do not simply distort reality. They regulate the entry conditions for new constructs. Cognitive dissonance does not merely indicate contradiction. It indicates that the system has reached the boundary of its current explanatory capacity. And when that boundary is reached, the question is no longer whether a belief is true or false in isolation. The question becomes whether it can survive the 3 conditions required for construct acceptance and successfully reorganize the structure of the Umwelt itself. George Kelly's 3 conditions for construct acceptance: How Your Mind Actually Decides What to Believe, by AZLAN ADNAN, MA. Sunday, 10th of May, 2026. Before any new idea can become part of your personal construct, before it can enter your Umwelt and change how you see the world, it must satisfy 3 important conditions first. George Kelly called these the 3 key conditions for a construct to be accepted. Here they are in simple language. First, permeability. Your mind will only accept a new idea if it can fit comfortably with what you already believe. If the new idea creates strong cognitive dissonance, that uncomfortable mental tension we talked about earlier, your mind will usually reject it right away. However, if the new idea is somewhat plausible and only partially conflicts with your existing beliefs, your mind will not reject it immediately. Instead, it will enter a period of flip-flopping, rapidly switching back and forth between the old idea and the new one. It may look as if you are holding 2 opposing ideas at the same time, but that is impossible. What is actually happening is mental time sharing. Your mind is alternating rapidly between the 2 ideas as it evaluates which one works better. Second, range of convenience. This is Kelly's fancy way of asking a very practical question. How useful is this idea in real life? If the new idea only explains one small thing but is useless everywhere else, your mind will usually not adopt it. The best ideas are the ones that can be used across many different situations in your daily life. Third, predictive efficiency. This is the most important condition. Your mind will ask, does this new idea actually help me predict what will happen next? If the new idea consistently makes accurate predictions, your mind will accept it. But if it keeps failing to predict correctly, your mind will eventually reject it. These three conditions, permeability, range of convenience, and predictive efficiency, are how your mind quietly decides what to believe and what to throw away. Kelly's 3 conditions for construct acceptance in other domains. Applications beyond social psychology. Having examined how the 3 conditions for construct acceptance govern the adoption of new personal constructs, we can now explore their relevance to other fields of thought. In educational psychology, these conditions explain the circumstances under which students actually internalize new knowledge, rather than merely memorizing it for examination. They reveal why certain concepts are embraced while others are quietly discarded despite repeated instruction. In pedagogy, the same conditions guide how educators should sequence and frame material. When teachers understand what makes a new idea permeable, useful across contexts, and predictively powerful, they can design lessons that align with the natural mechanisms of belief revision. Learning theory, however, offers the richest application of these 3 conditions. While educational psychology describes the conditions for learning and pedagogy offers practical teaching strategies, learning theory seeks to explain the actual cognitive mechanisms through which genuine conceptual change occurs. Here, Kelly's framework moves from mere description to a deeper explanation of the learning process itself. When a student upgrades Umwelt, that is, when they accept new personal constructs into their existing system of meaning, these 3 conditions become the decisive mechanism. The mind does not evaluate them simultaneously or randomly. It considers them consecutively, in a fixed order. The mind first applies the condition of permeability. If the new idea creates strong cognitive dissonance, it is rejected immediately, and the other conditions are never considered. However, when the cognitive dissonance is moderate, the mind enters a flip-flopping phase. It rapidly switches back and forth between the old construct and the new one. This is what we commonly experience as confusion. Back in 2005, I was at Tony Robbins' Date with Destiny in Surfer's Paradise, Queensland. He told the audience, "If you're feeling confused right now, that's a good thing. It means you're about to learn something new." He explained that confusion is the gap between 2 constructs. The uncomfortable feeling you get when your old construct is being challenged and a new, upgraded one is trying to come in. In Kelly's language, this is exactly the flip-flopping phase that occurs during permeability. The moment you adopt the new construct, the confusion disappears because the Umwelt has been successfully upgraded. Only when an idea satisfies the condition of permeability can it then be subjected to the 2nd and 3rd conditions. This explains why some conceptual changes occur rapidly while others meet prolonged resistance, sometimes lasting months or even years. These conditions therefore serve as a precise diagnostic lens for understanding both the initial rejection of ideas and the conditions required for genuine conceptual change. This mechanism is especially valuable for self-learners and autodidacts. When you notice yourself flip-flopping, instead of becoming frustrated, you can treat it as useful data. Your mind is actively comparing which model works better. Deliberately create small test situations where the 2 competing ideas make different predictions. Then observe which one matches reality more accurately. This turns confusion into a deliberate testing process and greatly speeds up the successful upgrading of your Umwelt. When teaching is deliberately aligned with these 3 conditions, genuine conceptual change becomes not just more likely, it becomes the natural and expected outcome. This same cognitive mechanism that governs how students upgrade their Umwelt in learning theory applies with equal force in philosophy. When philosophers evaluate new ideas, they too are subject to the very same 3 conditions. A philosophical idea must satisfy permeability within an existing worldview, demonstrate sufficient range of convenience across intellectual problems, and offer superior predictive or explanatory efficiency before it is accepted. A striking real-world example is Barry Marshall, who won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2005. For decades, the medical establishment believed stomach ulcers were caused by stress and spicy food. When Marshall proposed that ulcers were caused by Helicobacter pylori bacteria, the idea created massive cognitive dissonance within the existing medical construct system. It was so contrary to the accepted worldview that it was not only rejected, but actively ridiculed. As Marshall later remarked, science is not a democracy. He was essentially saying that truth is not determined by majority consensus or how strongly people believe in the old construct. A new idea must still satisfy all three conditions for construct acceptance on its own merit, no matter how many experts cling to the old belief. The fact that antibiotics could actually cure ulcers, while antacids and stress management had failed for decades, demonstrated both wide range of convenience and superior predictive efficiency. The new theory didn't just explain the cause of ulcers, it offered a practical, reliable solution that worked consistently across thousands of patients. Thus, Kelly's framework transcends its original disciplinary boundaries. It provides a unified account of belief revision that is as applicable to the classroom as it is to the philosopher's study.
About the author. High velocity, high granularity thinking. AZLAN Adnan is an autodidact and a polymath with an IQ of 168. He holds a Master of Arts in International Business and Management from the University of Westminster in London and a postgraduate certificate in teaching from Royal Holloway, University of London. His mind operates at a level that is visibly and measurably different from the average person. While most people think in linear, surface-level patterns and stay within narrow domains, AZLAN thinks in systems, layers, and deep causal connections. He moves at high velocity, rapidly synthesizing ideas while maintaining exceptional granularity, seeing fine details and subtle relationships that others completely miss. This rare combination of speed and resolution allows him to cross-pollinate concepts from physics, medicine, philosophy, consciousness studies, nutrition, politics, international relations, and religion in ways that feel both surprising and inevitable once you see them. This distinctive cognitive style is the driving force behind everything he writes. You can see it clearly in every chapter of this book and across the entire Mind Science series. The way he builds models, challenges entrenched assumptions, and connects seemingly unrelated phenomena is not just a writing style. It is how his mind naturally functions. AZLAN has written more than 100 books covering a remarkably wide range of subjects, including mind science, health and nutrition, politics, Islam, Russia, Iran, and international relations. Every single one of these books is released completely free in the public domain. All of them can be downloaded at no cost from Z Library. He deliberately places all his writings in the public domain because he believes that powerful, high-resolution ideas should not be locked behind paywalls or controlled by institutions. Knowledge and clarity of thought, in his view, belong to humanity. His goal is simple: to make these ideas freely available to anyone in the world who is ready and willing to engage with them, regardless of their financial situation or background. What you are about to read is therefore not an ordinary book. It is the direct output of a mind that thinks at a fundamentally different resolution. Every page reveals not only new ideas, but a completely different way of seeing and understanding reality itself. This is AZLAN Adnan's Mind at Work.
A Writer's Manifesto by AZLAN Adnan, M.A. As an agent provocateur and change agent, I write to shift paradigms. Nothing more, nothing less. I draw inspiration from Robert Baden-Powell's parting words, "Leave the world better than you found it." I also take heed of Buckminster Fuller's reminder, not to fight old systems, but to build new ones so compelling that the old becomes obsolete. So here is my pledge. Every book I write enters the public domain the moment it is finished. No royalties, no gatekeeping. Download my work from my Telegram channels, Z Library, and pass it along. Copy it. Quote it. Seed it into every mind that needs it. If you gain something from these words, wonderful. Spread them freely and help someone else along their path. Should you wish to contribute, do so voluntarily. Not more than 5% of what you earn this month. The same principle as T. Harv Eker's fifth jar. Treat it as a gesture of solidarity, not obligation. Whatever reaches me goes towards my various eye treatments. Keep the rest for yourself, and keep the chain moving forward. This is how we remake the world, one liberated idea at a time.
A heartfelt light. To every soul whose hand did give, you've helped me dream, helped me live. In darkest hours your light came through, with hearts so kind, so pure, so true. Your gifts, like stars in deepest night, have steered me gently toward the light. Each coin, each word, each silent prayer, a thread of hope, so rich, so rare. My eyes once dimmed now seek the skies, and slowly clearer visions rise. Because of you, I dare to see the world again. Its grace, its plea. Your compassion's flame will not just stay with me alone. It lights the way for others wandering through despair to feel the warmth of selfless care. You've shown what love in action means, in quiet ways through giving scenes. You've built a bridge from soul to soul and made the broken feel more whole. So let this thanks rise like a song, a melody both soft and strong. May your example gently call more hearts to rise to give. To fall into the joy of lifting pain, of planting hope where none remains. Your kindness walks beside me still, a light, a love, a living will.
Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to show your support.